So again, I've always been obsessed with the idea of optimization and where can we optimize here in emerging markets to solve a very big problem, right? And when you look at the African continent, it actually produces twice more food as it consumes. Yet there is hundreds of millions of people that suffers from malnutrition, right? So it's obviously not a scarcity problem. The food is there. It's a logistics problem.
That was the voice of Belal El-Megharbel, co-founder and CEO of MaxAB, the B2B marketplace for retailers. I am your host, Ali Zwail, and this is the Startups Arabia podcast, where you learn about the Arab startups ecosystem from the best founders, investors, and operators in the region. Welcome to the Startups Arabia podcast. My guest today is Belal El-Megharbel. Belal is the co-founder and CEO of MaxAB. After he graduated from Virginia Tech, Belal decided to join the family business and worked there for 2 years before joining the famous ride-hailing app Careem, the biggest exit in the Middle East so far. Despite a stellar career at Careem, he left the Middle East's first unicorn to build an app that would transform the Egyptian B2B grocery marketplace forever. In 2018, he teamed up with Mohamed Ben Halim, his co-founder and the CEO of MaxAB, and formed the e-commerce marketplace MaxAB to connect informal food and grocery sellers with suppliers and provide a wide range of services to underserved areas in Egypt and Morocco. I think I can safely say that MaxAB is one of the most highly valued and fastest growing startups out of Egypt. And that makes for a very interesting conversation that I'm sure you'll all enjoy. Now, here's our interview. Welcome to the Startups Arabia podcast. My guest today is Belal El-Megharbel, the CEO and co-founder of MaxAB. And it's a double pleasure for me to host Belal today. On one hand, he was recommended to me by several founders that I deeply respect, so I'm very looking forward to this interview. And on the second hand, I really love the mission of MaxAB because of the fact that it kind of empowers the little guy, the small mom and pop shops, and the retailers in forgotten places all over Egypt, Morocco, and hopefully all over North Africa and the Arab world in the coming years. So that's another reason I'm very happy to be hosting Belal today. Welcome, Belal.
Thank you so much, Ali, and thank you for the great introduction. Happy to be with you tonight.
Great. So maybe we'll start at the very beginning. So if you tell me a little bit in a few minutes, like how you came to the world of startups and to found MaxAB.
Sure. So basically, I've always been curious about building things and solving big problems. And this idea has always been on my mind, regardless what the problem is, right? But I found my passion when I saw that there's a massive opportunity that can serve the underserved areas, and it has something to do with optimization and supply chains, right? Because that's what I'm obsessed with, right? Supply chains in general. So the story happened once I moved back to Egypt. I actually tried to do a startup back in the days, to share videos online with a couple of my colleagues, and then obviously this went no. And then I went back to work for the family business, and during that time, I've actually has been spending some time with some of my colleagues from high school here in Egypt. And by complete coincidence, most of them worked for supply chain companies or FMCGs in general. And I learned that there was a massive gap in this part of the world in terms of how these FMCGs reach the small mom and pop shops in Egypt and other emerging markets. And that's where the idea of MaxAB actually have been initiated, right? But at that point of time, I had no clue how to build or scale a tech business, and I was very aware of it, right? And that's why I decided to join whom I thought at the time, and alhamdulillah, actually was right about it, was doing something meaningful in the region. That was Careem at the time. So luckily, I knocked on their door. They gave me a job, and I spent a year and a half there learning how to scale a tech company in emerging markets. And then the rest is history.
So, okay, maybe you can tell me a bit more about that problem that you recognized in the supply chain, because for very early on in my career, I worked in FMCG, and they were dependent in in their smaller mom and pop shops on distributors, and it seemed to be like a pretty standard, stable relationship uh, between the distributors, the retailers, the mom and pop shops, that is, and the FMCG. And, it's been going on for decades and probably still continuing until now. So where did you see the opportunity? I mean, where did you see the problem that could make a difference here?
Sure. So when you look at that supply chain end to end, it's actually quite fragmented and multi-layered, right? So basically, when you look at the market in Egypt and other emerging markets like Morocco, Nigeria, Pakistan, most of these markets, the big guys, the Krogers and the Walmarts of our part of the world only represent 10% of the business, right? The other 90% of the groceries being sold happens at the small mom and pop shops, right? And then when you zoom in at Egypt, right, there are 400,000 grocery stores. The distributors and the big players in this market would usually cover the most active or the bigger retailers, right? Those are 10% of the market. So these are 40,000 out of the 400,000, right? This fragmentation will always mean a lot of value being lost in that supply chain. So there's margins being lost. There is no visibility of data downstream. As soon as the products leave the FMCG warehouse and moves downstream, the visibility ends, right? So there is no pulse on the demand and what the consumers are doing, right? And the idea was to eliminate all these layers and connect the FMCGs directly to these mom and pop shops. But to do that, we had to redesign the entire supply chain, right? So you've worked in distribution and you know how the sales has been a push-driven supply chain, right? So these FMCGs will hire a distributor. He will then bring trucks and salesmen. These guys will pack their vehicles with whatever they think they're going to sell. They will pass by 20 retailers every day. They will only sell to 10 of them, so 50% successful. And they're only going to be selling one product, the product of that FMCG, right? And that makes the entire supply chain um, inefficient. And it's because it's push driven, you don't actually capture the retailer behavior, right? And once you don't have that data point, you're not able to optimize on your supply chain. And that's why we had to redesign the entire supply chain from a push driven supply chain to a pull driven supply chain that is triggered by the retailer placing an order to what he actually needs, right? And that's how we started. We designed this app. We gave these app to the retailers, and then we started buying inventory and aggregating it in warehouses that is in close proximity to these retailers. These retailers can then see all the items that we have in stock, and we had a very strong emphasis on always being in stock because these retailers don't have access to much credit, so they're not able to stock aggressively. So they'd always want their supplier to be reliable, right? So being reliable meaning always in stock and delivering on time every time. And we focused on these reliability matrices quite well. And this is honestly what got us so far. We're always consistently in stock, or better, you're never 100% in stock. And we've been consistently delivering on our SLA, which is 24 hours, and we deliver 97% of our orders within these 24 hours.
It's wonderful. Yeah, one of the things I liked about this approach when I observed it is that it's kind of everyone else was looking at this supply chain from the top down. So looking at the needs of the FMCGs and the existing ecosystem. But you delivered a solution that made perfect sense for the mom and pop shop. So the one who used to close their store so that they can go to the wholesaler and get some stuff. The one that had to have, many orders from different distributors to get the different products rather than getting just one package with everything all at once. So there is this focus on the end customer, the retailer. So was this like deliberate, or did this come out of solving the gaps and trying to optimize the supply chain, or did you actually talk to a lot of these retailers and see their problems as well?
Look, so basically, when you're building any marketplace model that connects buyers and sellers, you have to actually figure out who do you want to bet on, right? And our bet was quite clear. We wanted to bet on the retailer, right? The idea is that if the retailers really love you, right? If they see the value you add, they will tell their retailer friends, and then your retailer base will grow significantly, and then all the sellers would want to sell on your platform, right? So we focused on understanding what are the retailers need, and serve them, and be relentless about the way we do it. Extremely focused about serving these guys. And again, it was a bet on the small mom and pop shops that has been historically underserved, specifically in the areas we operate in, and we exclusively operate in what we call underserved areas, right? These are not the nice push neighborhoods of Egypt. These are actually semi well covered by the other players in the market, and then focus on the ones that has historically been suffering from the lack of reliability in this market.
Yeah, that's really cool. But when you first started to validate the idea, I think I read somewhere that you didn't do that with an app. I mean, you took a warehouse somewhere and you started working. How did you go about validating the idea? Can you tell us more about that?
Yeah, so basically, our thesis and our philosophy in building products in emerging markets is very different than in the western part of the world, right? Because the challenges we face are very different, and the ecosystem here is quite different, right? So the unfortunate reality of our part of the world is that it's cheaper to try offline, right? So we actually, yes, we did actually have a small warehouse. It was literally 400 square meters, a couple of vehicles, where me and my colleagues would go out and try and sell uh, using a cash van model that we actually are planning to kill, right, in the market, right? But you actually need to know what's wrong about this model to be able to offer a better solution, right? And nobody knew us at the time. So nobody, again, think 2018, there was no such idea as B2B e-commerce. Everybody thought we're crazy because we're going to give a retailer in these kinds of neighborhoods an app and think that these guys will actually use it, right? So we had to start building trust, right? So we had to show up every single day with the inventory that they buy and say, here it is, right? And during this period, we've been started to collect data, right? Creating profiles in our back for those retailers. And then we went to phase two, where we created a call center that will do outbound calls and receive inbound calls from these retailers. And during that period of time, we started to actually develop our retailer facing app. By and by that point, we had enough data how these guys see their products, what's important to them, right? What do we really need to show, and so on and so forth. So when we showed up and started giving them the app, they had already developed some sort of a relationship with us, and we had already built our operational supply chain, which actually is a way more sophisticated technology to build than your retailer facing app, specifically in emerging markets, with emerging markets challenges in the supply chain infrastructure that we operate in, and the reliability issues of various party that we need to actually consider, and actually be able to predict demand, so we're able to stock better and all these things. These were very unique challenges that we were focused on at the beginning, and that's how we actually started. Now, the idea of moving people to the app was actually quite challenging, right? Because we were using our boots on the ground, our field force, to actually onboard the retailers on an app, which was something that has not been done ever in the region before, right? The usual salesman has always been used to selling a product, right? While we were selling a service, right? We're selling our application. Go on the application and you'll find all the products you want, and will actually show up within 24 hours. Now, as people started trying the service and we actually showed up, right? Uh, it felt like a magical experience for these guys, right? And that's what kept them coming back. And that's when we started scaling quite significantly.
Right. And how long between like beginning to test the idea until you had that app in people's hands?
I think we launched the app anywhere between 4 to 5 months from selling our first product.
Well, so I mean, it was still quite quick. I guess you started by getting your operational system set up, some relationships with suppliers, and then you went to the market, and then you built the app, right? And you started selling the app, so to speak.
Exactly. Exactly. I mean, yeah. So 4 months looks quick now that we are close to a 5 years old company, but felt like ages when we very first started, right?
Yep. Yep. So, I mean, it's really cool how quickly things have moved, isn't it, over the last 5 years? But maybe I'll start from something very basic. I mean, how did you come up with the name for MaxAB? I think you started with another name. Little birdie told me it was Muerrid or something like that. But MaxAB is such a cool name. It's so on target. And just for non-Arabic speakers, it means profit. So, I mean, something very relevant to small retailers. So how did you come up with that name?
We've actually changed name like a couple of times before landing on MaxAB. And we wanted a name that fits both in Arabic and in English. So again, we thought, what's the most important thing in the life of the retailer, right? And it's making money, right? That's they're trying to feed their families, and hence we came up with MaxAB in Arabic. And then, what exactly do we do? We maximize value by connecting point A to point B directly, and that's like MaxAB, right? And hence we found a name that actually fits both the Arabic and the English version, and it made sense both ways, and it stuck. And that was the name we landed on after a couple of tries.
It's spot on. Congratulations. So okay, let's dive a little into the business model, or let's dive a lot into the business model. So if you can tell me more about kind of how MaxAB makes money today. Do you guys buy inventory based on your demand expectations and put it in the warehouses, and then sell it to the retailers and make up money from the margins there? Or is there another model that you're making money?
Sure. So we actually have now several. Our business have evolved, but when it comes to FMCG specifically, it's a complete retail model or an in-stock model, as we call it. Whereas, yes, as you mentioned, we do buy the inventory and then we would mark it up according to market prices, and sell it to the retailers, right? This is how MaxAB started, right? And again, we were very focused on understanding what the retailer needs. And from that understanding, we came up with our fintech solution, right? So any supply chain consists of inventory moving down the chain and cash moving the other side of the chain, right? And then very early on, we realized that you will never sell 100% of the inventory for any single retailer, right? Not a single business would buy all their goods from one supplier, but one supplier can actually process all their payments. And hence we launched MaxAB Madfu'at, which is our fintech solution. And the idea is to offer all types of payments solutions and quasi-banking solutions to these retailers, right? So we started by a bill aggregation business so that retailers can start moving money into our wallet, and doing bill aggregation and increasing their profits by selling airtime and other utility bill payments to the retailers. And then we started offering credit on top of this data and coupling it with the e-commerce data that we have. And then we launched what we call business payments as well, which we give the retailer the ability to buy inventory from us, and now we're onboarding other suppliers as well, using the money he has in the MaxAB wallet, right? So that's the other business that we're extremely focused on now, is offering all the financial services that a retailer would need to grow their business.
That's extremely cool. So, I mean, how much, I guess the revenue is still mostly from the commerce part, and the fintech is still starting to grow, right?
So actually, the fintech has grown quite substantially, and out of the 70,000 merchants that we have active here in Egypt, we actually have been able to onboard more than 20,000 of them onto our fintech business as well. So it's
Wow.
roughly more than 1/3 of our retailer base, and they're doing a similar volume in e-commerce and fintech. And we actually are projecting that this part of the business will be substantially bigger in size over the next couple of years.
Incredible. So I would guess that it's very dependent on the other side in terms of data that feeds the algorithm. So you can, for example, like underwrite the loans, for example, that you give to the people, or decide how much credit to give someone, or how much the time they have to pay back, and things like that. So there's kind of there are two wings on one plane, so to speak.
Sure. Yeah. So basically, when you're trying to build credit scoring algorithms, the more data you have, the meriter on these retailers, right? So now we don't only know the inventory they're buying from us, but we also have a quite good pulse on what traffic do they get, and what kind of customers do they get as well. And all of this feeds into the models that I'm not going to say are fully up and running. They're still been built and getting better and better as we scale and as we collect more data from these retailers. But yes, as you mentioned, again, the more the meriter, the more data we have on these retailers, the more we understand how they function and how they operate, what kind of customers walk into their store, so that we can also tailor our products even better to them.
Okay. And going back to the original business, it's a pretty low margin, like per product. You don't usually, I mean, there's not a big margin there. So I'm assuming that since it's low margin, that it's very important to do a lot of inventory turns during the year to really maximize profit. And there's a lot. So what do you do to maximize inventory turns and to make sure that you're turning over your products as quickly as possible?
Sure. So basically, again, the magic always lies in the data, right? So basically, because we have accumulated so much data, and again, we understand every single morning, we know how many people have opened the app, and we have historical data of conversions of every kind of product, right? On the app. And then we use this data to build what we call the just-in-case inventory model. We operate with a very limited inventory on hand. You cannot work with a just-in-time model in emerging markets. It's just very theoretical. On ground is unapplicable. And we don't have to stock 30 days or more like a normal offline wholesaler, right? So we actually operate with only 10 days on average of inventory on hand because we have this data. Now you leverage this data as well to build a personalized pricing engine and a personalized promotion engine. So we've built these two models as well to be able to push and adapt for every region. So our business is what we call hyperlocal, right? So our the guy that buys from us would buy from other wholesalers in his neighborhoods. Nobody have yet to reach the scale and the coverage we have in this market, but we have to adapt to the competition in these markets, right? Which are usually small offline wholesalers in these areas where everybody sells with his own price. So a single unified price does not work, right? And that's what's unique about the B2B e-commerce business. That is not very applicable for the B2C e-commerce business, as an example, right? And as you mentioned, yes, it's a business of low margin, so scale is extremely important, and operational efficiency is of utmost important, right? So that's why we also focus on all the operational technology, like route optimization and dispatching, picking and sorting optimization inside our warehouses as well. And then we also start adding value-added services such as the credit, such as data analytics that we sell to our suppliers, our FMCGs, to be able for them to take better decisions. So we give them stuff like market share data, price elasticity, and how much a £1 increase in their pack of whatever good they sell on their demand. We do new product launches. So if they want to try a new product in the market, we're very quick to put that on the shelf and give them retailers' feedback, which are things that have never been applicable before. And by stacking all these on top of each other, we're able to build potentially a high margin business, not a low margin business.
Right. And that's key, isn't it? Because, I mean, some people argue, you're just an automated distribution business, but it's really much more than that. There's so much more value that you can take out of the value chain by doing all these things. And I know you're always investing in cutting edge things, like you did with recently with AWS and working on improving the demand prediction algorithms and things like that. But at the same time, there are a lot of like existing people you are disintermediating in the wholesaler who have strong relations with FMCGs. FMCGs as well need to see the benefit from, you know, taking risks with a new kind of partner that will take more of the margin in the value chain, etc. So what's your pitch to FMCGs?
Look, so basically, again, if you look at this supply chain that is extremely fragmented, the average case of whatever product that you can think of will, on average, exchange hands 4 to 5 times before it reaches the retailer, right? So this is moving downstream and sideways. So a wholesaler would usually buy from another wholesaler, and then that would move to a smaller wholesaler and the retailer. So it moves downstreams and sideways as well, right? So if you can only picture that there is a 2 to 3% margin that is actually being lost in every one of those transactions, there's a big margin to be captured over time where you can pass some of these savings to the retailers and some of these savings to the FMCGs as well. So we are creating an environment where pretty much everybody wins. But whenever there is a disrupting play in the market, there is always gonna be people that are not that very happy with the business. But that's the virtue of life, right? And in a market that is $300 billion in our part of the world, in the Middle East, I don't believe that there's only gonna be a winner. It's not a winner takes all market, right? So there's always going to be room for incumbent players, and we also we foresee that some of these players will change the way they do business, right? So they will start offering different unique propositions to the FMCGs, so that they create room for a disruptive player to actually improve the efficiency of that market overall.
Yeah. Disruption is always good for a market, ultimately. Something that's very interesting here is the data you're collecting. It's like a treasure trove of data about trends and demand, and you know, that is, even though your inventory is just in case, but the data is very much just in time and really timely. So this could potentially be a huge source of revenue as well, I think. How do you think about this issue?
Of course, I mean it's not an issue; it's a blessing in disguise, right? So basically, and the data itself is not as valuable if you don't know how to do with it, right? And that actually takes time, right? Yeah, pretty much what we've seen here in the region and what I've observed around us is that it's very hard to actually capture quality data in the market, right? So you have to make sure that your data is as clean as it gets so that you are actually capturing the real behavior of the retailers, right? Stuff like, how do you eliminate duplicate accounts, right? How do you make sure that you're actually capturing all the needed data during the retailer's journey, from the point he opens the app till he checks out, and even after he checks out, what does he do, right? And then how do you tabulate properly all this in the database, and then how do you extract value out of it, right? And as I mentioned, we do have analytics products that we sell to a vast range of FMCGs actually. Again, this data we used internally to optimize our supply chain, and then we realized that there is external value that can be captured from such data, and we started engaging with a lot of our partners in the FMCG industry, and actually provide them with data that is, as you mentioned, super real time, that did not exist in the market before, where they can adjust their decision making specifically in turbulent times like we see the world in today.
Yeah, absolutely. So speaking of turbulent times, I mean, the past 5 years must have been like being in the middle of a hurricane for you. Things moving so quickly. You know, I saw like when you raised the seed round in 2019, you were 270 employees. By the time you were raising the the Series A, you were 1,600 employees. I have no idea how many employees you have now. You have the core business. There's also the fintech business. There's the private labels. We didn't speak about that, but you seem to be starting private labels as well. So, I mean, and the data now, you're thinking about how to use it. All these different things happening at the same time, typical blitzscaling kind of situation. In a company that's less than 5 years old or maybe 5 years old, how do you prioritize all the different things, the MaxAB needs to do? How do you work through your strategy?
Yes, so there's definitely have a lot that have happened, and again, what got us from A to point B will never get us from point B to point C, right? So we're a very different company in every stage, from pre-seed to seed, from seed to A, from A to B. The challenges have changed, but I believe we've been quite agile in adapting to how do we need to look like, and we've always completely redesigned the way we do business. Now, what got us here is definitely the colleagues we have at the organization. So at the end of the day, I'm just the face that represents a lot of people that are doing a much better job than I am in making sure that MaxAB makes it, right. And what got us where we at now is the quality of the people we have on board, and that we are very blessed and lucky to have these people on board that are able to actually adapt from every stage to the other, right? And this is actually quite difficult to find, right? The same people, or the vast majority of them, are able to be hustlers on ground when needed, and then sit in front of a computer and then analyze data and then build structures and operations. We're now 3,500 people in the organization. So we can, there's no way you run this business like when it was 200 people, or when you were only 6-7 people in the office, right? So there's a lot that needs to change, how we do decisions, how do you build checks and balances that make sure that you're building for the upcoming stage, right? And you always have to not lose yourself in dreams and hopes of the future, and not to be too distracted by the day-to-day, and find that balance that will always make sure you're doing and getting the targets that you've set for yourself on the short term without deviating from the path that you set for the company to the future.
Yeah. And I guess the role of the CEO changes as well dramatically from, each stage to the next. And maybe at this stage, it's more about your role is more about resource allocation, deciding, where to put the resources of the company, and delegating, the actual execution to others, and following up on that, I guess, more so than it was where you were probably, your hand was in every single decision in the first year or two.
So basically, I believe a CEO's role is it's actually quite simple. It's, you have to do two things, and you have to do them very right. You have to be able to hire the best people and bring them on board, and they have to be very bought into the mission and what we're trying to accomplish. And the second one is fundraising, to fuel the experiments and the trials of these bright minds that you bring on board, right? So basically, if you do these two things right, if you have the right people and the right quality of investors on board, you're able to always deliver things that has never been thought are actually achievable, specifically in emerging markets, right? And again, the hard thing is that it's actually quite difficult to build a technology business in the North African region, to be precise, where there's not that many companies that have reached that scale. So the hard part is that there is no reference, right? And once you don't have a very clear reference, you have to actually make sure that you have the people on board that will figure this out, right? There's nobody to learn from. We all are learning on the job, and we all are wearing a way bigger shoes than our size, and we're trying to grow as people to actually fill these shoes.
Yeah, that's so true. And this is actually a question that was, there were a few people who submitted questions when they found out that that I'm interviewing you. One of them is a listener called Darwish, and he was talking about, he wanted to ask you, as early teams who built the company, as you said, who had such a role, some of them will be able to adapt to the growth, and some people will be more the type of people who were good in the early stage and not as good maybe for the next stage, at least in leadership roles. So how do you balance the idea of loyalty versus, loyalty to the people who built the company versus effectiveness and being, and taking the company where it needs to go in the future? Because as you mentioned, what brought you here won't get you there, so to speak.
Sure. So basically, I think we've been quite transparent with all our colleagues that we bring on board, right? So and this transparency makes these decisions quite easy and quite straightforward, right? So basically, again, as I mentioned, we all know that we're wearing a way bigger shoes than our size. At least most of us, right? We definitely have a lot of senior people that came from very strong backgrounds, but as an average rule, as you build a startup, you always start with a group of people that are hustling uh, um, their way in, rather than a lot of people that come from 10, 20, 30 years of experience, right? And we always make it clear what we appreciate and how do we foresee this journey. And as what I mentioned to you, I've always mentioned inside the company as well, that what got us to point A won't get us to point B, and what got us to point B won't get us forward, and you all need to adapt, right? And it's very easy for people, once this is very clear to them, to actually know what's known from them in this upcoming period, right? And they either get there or we have to part ways, and there's no shame about it, right? And actually, some people actually just don't like the other job. It's not that they're not incapable. We've seen a lot of capable people, and by the way, I was one of those guys, right? And then I had to change, right?
Yep.
I like to do things myself, specifically when they have to do with either optimization or supply chain. But I had to be a different person every year, or actually every 9 months, right? And I understand quite well. For me to go to the next phase, I have to be a new person, right? And this cascades down the organization.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think I heard you in a video saying, that the most two important things are execution and people. And so maybe I'll ask you, how do you build an environment where people can execute effectively? What needs to be done to do that? Because it's not just about hiring, right? It's about also creating the environment for the hires to
Yeah.
to execute.
So yes, so definitely like two things. We actually decentralize decision making to the best of our ability, and then we make it very clear what do we appreciate. Right? You need to be failing quickly, learning from your mistakes and moving on. Right? If you don't fail enough, then you're not trying enough bold things. Right? And then we make it very clear what do we appreciate. And once it's very clear what you appreciate, which as you mentioned, yes, we are big believers. Execution is the only thing that matters. I can speak strategy for hours and years, right? But if I'm not able to execute on these strategies, they mean nothing, right? And we make this very clear to our colleagues in the organization, and that's the thing that we appreciate. And if we execute well, we will go to the next phase, right? And by seeing the results of this strategy work, people starting believing in this, right? And again, you show and you appreciate, and you show what you appreciate as an organization, and build that culture of getting things done is the most appreciated things, and you embrace it yourself. It definitely also cascades down in the organization.
Yep. So, going to another thing, I mean, these are very tough economic times. A lot of startups are doing layoffs, etc. At the same time, mashallah, I was like on LinkedIn, it says that your headcount has grown 10%. I expect it's probably more in the last year, despite all this. And I see you have a lot of job openings. So isn't that risky that you're growing so fast in these types of times?
Look, so at the end of the day, you have to actually take bets, right? This is as tricky as this time is. We believe that there's so many opportunities that arises from this madness that's happening all around us, and we actually want to capture these opportunities. Like what other people see as a challenge, we see as an opportunity. And we've also honestly been blessed with a business model that we're building that is actually does well in tough times, right? So the thing that people don't stop doing is they don't stop paying for stuff. Hence the fintech payments, it's still growing quite fast, and they still buy food, right? The average Egyptian spends 40% of every pound he makes on groceries, right? We've seen these trends of people trading down from high expensive items to lower items, from big pack sizes to small pack sizes, and we've been able to adapt quite quickly to this as well. And that's what have actually made us able to actually capture growth in this tough environment. And as you mentioned, we're quite an efficient go-to-market strategy, right? So we are actually extremely cost-efficient in a lot of cases for a lot of FMCGs to actually give us more inventory to move, not less, because we are efficient in how we put their products on the shelves of these retailers.
Wonderful. So Bilal, you have so many things pulling you in so many different directions, operations stuff, hiring, as you mentioned, new initiatives, probably investor relationships, board meetings, etc. How do you organize your time? What's a typical work week look like?
Well, I'm quite a messy person that you would not find half my meetings scheduled in my calendar, and I manage by observation. So I'll be walking like a crazy madman around the office trying to see what everybody's doing. But again, that was an earlier phase, and I'm trying to change. I'm becoming a more organized person to be able to cater for these changes. And again, as we operate today in 24 or 25 cities today in two markets, and launching the third market quite soon as well. So I don't see everybody, right? So I have to actually start putting these things together. And again, I depend a lot on my colleagues in both the management team and the rest of our colleagues to actually empower them to take these decisions. And my job now is pretty much to bulldoze their way, right? And that's what I always tell them. Like, how do I pave the way for you to what you need to deliver? And by the virtue of my job now, I actually have to spend at least 50 to 70% of my time externally, managing external stakeholders, as you mentioned, fundraising, investors and partners in the ecosystem, to be able again to capture these growth opportunities, right? You need things that will make you grow by leaps and bounces, and at a specific scale. These opportunities have to be quite big to actually move the needle, and that's what I'm personally focused on. Plus fundraising.
Cool. So you going on another tack, you're currently hiring a head of manufacturing for your private label products. I saw that in the job openings, and you seem to be putting... Huh?
You've done your homework very well, Ali.
Well, I try just to. So it seems you're making a big investment in the private labels area. Can you tell me more about? So it's a lot of vertical integration that you're thinking about these days. Can you tell me more about what drove you in this direction?
Sure. So basically, again, it was driven by mainly our insights from our data telling us that there are specific gaps in the market that nobody is filling, right? Either a specific product that goes out of stock quite a lot from the suppliers for one reason or the other, or either there is a new product or a product that the consumers don't care too much about what brand it is. They'd rather care about a high quality alternative at a cheaper price. And then we leverage again all this data to actually manufacture them with other manufacturers that have underutilized manufacturing capabilities, right? So we also, working with our suppliers, we figured out that there is so much unutilized capacity in manufacturing here in Egypt, for one reason or the other. Like the supplier planned for something that never happened, or the supplier actually wants to deliver a cheaper alternative but he doesn't want it to actually harm his brand if he's a tier one brand. And then we work with them in utilizing these production plans so that they can actually save money overall or make more money, and also the retailer makes some money and the consumer buys an alternative at a cheaper price, right? And it's a very, very, very hectic job to manage, honestly, manufacturing capabilities that are not fully under your control, and making sure at the end of the day, this is people's food. So quality control, there's no room for mistakes. Like not showing up on time, this can be tolerated. But again, when it comes to people's food, we actually are quite focused on this. So for whoever is applying for this role, it's going to be a very hard role, and and hopefully we're able to fill that position soon.
Yeah. So well, good luck to them. But do you have? I mean, so I guess the way you're balancing, you're actually helping your suppliers. So that's why you're not worried about this spoiling the relationship with the suppliers, because you're actually giving them the better use of their existing capacity. And I second what you said, because about the brands and they're worrying about brand dilution. Because I know one big FMCG who they had two brands, and they had exactly the same product inside the package, but just totally different names and positioning, because they don't want to dilute the main brand and say, you know, they're selling the brand cheaper, and they want to, you know, increase their market. But aren't you, going back, I mean, aren't you worried about focus, like that this is a very different type of business with very different success criteria? And yes, you have the data to say that these private labels are needed, but the actual operations part can be, how can I put it, like dilutive of your focus and your bandwidth.
Yeah, so the way we do these kinds of initiatives, that we actually create a company within the company, where the head of that vertical is completely empowered to take a lot of decisions and building his own operations, so that they can run as quickly as they can, right? And again, so we try to balance between the best of both worlds, use the data that MaxAB have, and then run a very different operation. So it comes from the realization first, right? So what you see companies do mistakes with, where they think it's going to be the same business, right? And then they start treating it as an extension to their business, right? It's an extension to their value, but it's a whole different business, right? So you have to treat it like one, and then you empower that team to take decisions, and then nobody else is affected within the normal organization, right? They treat them like another supplier that's trying to sell on our platform, right? And then you
Right.
actually create some sort of a healthy internal competition of people, different teams trying to give the retailers best quality goods at the most affordable price.
Yeah, so it's kind of like the data layer is like the base for everything in the company, and then you have different things built on it, from commerce to private labels to fintech, etc. With
Exactly. And we do
different,
one
yeah,
step at a time. Yeah. So we're actually very big fans of focus. Like, and when everybody was expanding, we were actually very zoomed in just doing, not even Egypt. We're only doing Greater Cairo, and we're only doing one supply chain, which was the dry supply chain. Once we got that right, we started to replicate that supply chain into other cities, and then eventually other markets. And then we started launching other supply chains. And then once we perfected that, we started going one step backwards in the supply chain and launching our own private label, and one step forward with the retailer and offering them other value-added services, such as the fintech solution.
right. Okay, so going to a different area, in 2021, you decided to acquire Waste to Cap to enter the Moroccan market. Can you tell me what drove this decision to acquire rather than to build? So, I mean, you could have tried to build a subsidiary, for example, and used the knowledge you have in Egypt and Morocco, but you decided to first acquire and then build up from there. Did you make this analysis at the time, or how did you make this decision?
Sure. So basically, as you mentioned, you don't want to dilute the team's focus, and you have to acknowledge that there's always smart people building similar businesses elsewhere, and I'd always rather partner than compete with whenever it makes sense, right? So this was the decision. Now, the decision to do Morocco was actually because it was the closest you can get to Egypt when it comes to market dynamics. And hence we went through that path, and we were not very aware of the market, to be honest, right? So we had to figure out how to partner with people that we can leverage the knowledge we have collected over the years, and then let them do their thing when it comes to localizing our offering in the market, and then you can eventually build a quite strong platform that can distribute to FMCGs not only in one market, but actually multiple markets.
Yeah. So yeah, so you basically use it's like making even stronger. So instead of just using your know-how, you have the local and you add to it your know-how, and that's even, 1 + 1 = 3, so to speak. So I mean, yeah, and you raised also in 2021 $40 million, and then followed by the 15 million when you were acquiring Ways to Gap. So I mean, that's a lot of money, and it probably comes with a lot of milestones and expectations that you need to build towards. So how do you? Uh, what are these expectations, and how do you plan for the upcoming fundraise, so to speak? What needs to be done to take it to the next level?
So basically, again, I think what we're trying to get to now is we're no longer an e-commerce play, right? We're building a super app for the retailer, right? And we're trying to serve him in so many multiple ways. And then we're trying to build a platform that would serve an entire region, both moving goods and money in these regions. So that's where we aspire to go, right? So again, started by e-commerce, launched the fintech business. We've also launched a very successful business which we call logistics as a service, where we empower the retailers to deliver e-commerce packages to the consumer. And we've partnered with Amazon, Jumia, and other e-commerce provider here in the local market. And the idea was quite simple. How can we do this cheaper while we create a new revenue stream to the retailer that hasn't been there before? And that picked up way better than we actually expected. And we have hundreds of retailers that are actually using these service, and again, working with the biggest name in this industry, and giving them a reliable service when it comes to serving these neighborhoods that have actually been also very difficult to deliver e-commerce packages to, right? So I believe the investors that always come look for, again, that multiplier effect, that leap and bounce after they have invested in the company. And they need to see how this business is going to grow to the point where it's going to return 3 to 5 times their money, right? And they have to have that conviction. And that conviction comes from two things: historical execution and the TAM and the total addressable market that you are trying to actually go after, and having a track record that you've been able to do that.
Yeah, yeah, that's perfectly put. So I mean, when going to the executive aspect of things, when did you start having external board members at MaxAB? And what makes for a great board?
So look, boards are usually quite tricky, right? Just by the virtue of the job itself, right? So these are a group of people that usually don't eat except once a quarter to look over numbers in a company where they're not involved in the day to day, right? So understanding that dynamic is key to be able to get the best out of the board, and give them a full picture and a transparency of what's actually happening on ground, right? And trust is key when it comes to these boards. I think we started, so the first round we had was, as all startups are, on a convertible note basis. So obviously did not have a board at that time. And then once we raised our Series A, we started to have a board, and then the board grew. And I think, again, we're also blessed to have a quite diversified board that actually serves as a good check and balance to everything we do, and help bring a lot of that external knowledge to our organization, and then we couple it up with actually what's happening on ground, and then collectively come with an adjusted way forward, because that way forward always adjusts, right? The mission is the same, the vision is the same, but how are you going to get there actually always have to be reiterated as the market dynamics change.
Yeah, and just on the same thing, but a little different. What are the characteristics? And this is a question from another podcast listener called Mark. So, what are the characteristics of the best investors and the worst, if you can say?
Look, so basically, I think the best investors are usually ones that listens, right? And actually have something useful to say, right? Most of the time, right? So basically, specifically in the Middle East, and I'm not talking about MaxAB to be specific, but we've seen a lot of boards go wrong, right? And this is very, very, very unfortunate. Now, the entire ecosystem is it's in infancy, right? Like most of the funds are quite early. Most of us as founders are also quite young and early to this scene. So we're all learning, right, here in the Middle East, how to actually do that and manage that specifically when tech is quite new, right? Because how you build a tech company is also very different than how do you build a traditional business. And building a tech company in emerging markets, in Egypt mainly, and Morocco, like these kinds of North African markets, also very different than how you built a tech company in Europe or the US, right? So I think everybody is kind of learning, and it is yet to be seen how is a perfect board for such a company evolves. But what I can tell you is, again, we're all learning during this process. We're all going to do our fair share of mistakes as board members or as management teams till we figure out how do we get there. But I think the best again are ones that listens and know when to actually tell you something insightful, and when do they get away from your way so that you can do their things. And that's have been our experience with the best board members. They really know when to actually intervene, and when do we actually get out of your way, right? There's nothing wrong about it, right? And I believe it's some of the best board members that I have seen are the best at doing these two things.
Yeah, that's a very good answer, and a very diplomatic one, I must say. And it kind of brings me to another question by Mark, which is about listening, actually. Of course, listening is also very important for the leaders of our organization, for you. How have you worked on listening and being a better listener and a better arbitrator, so to speak, inside the company?
Sure. So the tricky thing about MaxAB or any supply chain business, that there's so many different minds in place, right? By virtue of it, a supply chain. So you have the commercial aspect is very different than the operational aspect, very different than the financial aspect, and very different than the technology and the product side of things, right? So be able to manage all this. There's no other way but listening, right? So you have to have a certain level of humility that allows you to actually listen and learn. And again, it comes by the acknowledgement of knowing that we don't know everything, or I don't know everything, and I'm wearing, again, a way bigger shoe than my size, right? So once you come up to those realization, you start listening quite more, right? And then you make up your judgment, because you usually have a wider scope and a wider view of what's happening. And that's how I personally take decisions, right? So you listen to everybody in the room. I usually like to be the last person to speak, right? So I usually like to absorb all the information that is available, but you never wait till you have 100% of the information to take a decision, right? You cannot function with 50% either, right? You need to have 70 to 80% of the information to be able to take a decision. And then the rest is honestly intuition and luck. I'm not going to lie, right? So you trust your instinct, you trust your intuition, and then you take a bet, right? And again, sometimes I'm right, sometimes I'm wrong. And then I acknowledge full consequences of all these bets that we take.
Yeah, and as a wise man once said, if you wait till you have 100% of the data to take a decision, you're too late. So you just have to do it this way. It doesn't work any other way. So that's great. And you also need to communicate a lot, right? Both internally and externally. I mean, the CEO is basically communicating all the time. So what are the best practices for founders? Should everyone know bad news? When do you communicate what? How do you make that decision, and how do you drive communication?
Look, I think transparency is always a key to success, right? So yeah, even when hard decisions have to be made, full transparency has to be there. And it's usually, to a lot of people's surprise, will be taken much better than they have thought, right? As long as you're doing the right thing by the people, as long as this is the right decision for the business, you always have to be as transparent. Now, I'm not saying I'm the best communicator whatsoever. Usually, I actually think this is one of the things that I'm not very, very good at, that I'm trying to improve. And our colleagues and the organizations, most of them are helping me get there. Most of them are better communicator than myself, so I rely a lot on them to communicate, to be honest. But I don't think there's any other way that will make you get there. Like, if you think that by hiding or trying to outsmart people who should actually know the business better than you, in most of the cases, is just the output will not be great.
Yeah. No, I mean, and let me say, I mean, one of the reasons I asked this question is because I saw a video of some of the drivers or the delivery team in MaxAB, talking, and they seem to really have alignment and clarity towards the vision of MaxAB and have the ambition with the company to really grow it and loyalty to it. So I felt that you were doing a good job actually communicating
We're
to
trying.
the team.
We're not perfect, but we're trying.
Yeah, great. So this is another question from Darwish, another podcast listener, and he wants to ask you, what keeps you motivated day in and day out?
Well, again, I think what keeps me motivated is I do see the light at the end of the tunnel. I see the opportunity to build a company that will define the region, right? Or this is the ambition, at least, right? And this goal I'm very focused on, and I'm trying to do my best to get there. Now, the rest is outside my hand. So anything that's in my hand to do, and I don't do, keeps me up at night. As long as the rest is things that I cannot control and couldn't have done a better job I actually sleep like a baby. Like, I wouldn't mind these things whatsoever, right? So I think the trust that our investors and our colleagues have put in this organization makes me want to get there, not just for me, but for all of those, again, whether our colleagues or our investors that have trusted in us to get there. And I think if we are able to do what we claim we are going to do, we're going to leave a dent. And this is something that encourages everybody on the MaxAB team to keep hustling till we get there.
I'm sure it does. And this is kind of a personal question. I wasn't going to ask you, but it occurred to me now that you were you were at Virginia Tech, and then you went and you joined your family business. You were importing steel, something totally different from the startup world, and then you kind of made a very big decision. I think I would expect to leave this and to go into the startup world and to do something. I mean, why didn't you just stay in the company? What made you want to do this startup, to make this dent that you were speaking about?
Look, I think if you are to be successful and build something meaningful, you have to really love what you do, right? So I was looking for this thing that I really love to do, right? Not that I'm making money at or whatever, right? So that's a byproduct that comes at the very end if you are actually ends up loving and being good at what you do, right? So again, I've always been obsessed with the idea of optimization, and where can we optimize here in emerging markets to solve a very big problem, right? And when you look at the African continent, it actually produces twice more food as it consumes. Yet there is hundreds of millions of people that suffers from malnutrition, right? So it's obviously not a scarcity problem. The food is there. It's a logistics problem. And that excited me actually quite well, to actually go on this endeavor and try and see, can you get some of the bright minds here in the Middle East, whether they are from here or excited about the region, and get them to solve that problem. And what will be the result is yet to be determined if we're actually successful at what we do. But just long story short, I believe you have to really love what you do, because it's a very, very, very long, very, very harsh life, more than can people imagine, right? We only see the bright side of things, and the articles and the announcements of fundraisings and acquisitions and all these things, but it can be a quite lonely journey to get there, and it requires an intense amount of resilience, specifically in markets that in the Middle East in general, that is not as structured or as stable as the Western part of the world.
Yep, I agree. And with that, maybe I'll go into the quick fire round and start with this important question relevant to what you were just saying, which is, how do you unwind and how do you relax and stay energized?
Oh, well, that's a tough one. I don't think I'll get to the point where I'm actually very relaxed till we hit specific milestones, right? And I'm not saying it should be this way. It might be a devil of my own making. It might be my own personal issue. But the reality is again, I only relax when there is nothing more that I could have done, right? So again, there was a very recent incident when there was a big issue with Silicon Valley Bank, and I'm pretty sure your listeners are aware of this. And we had some money, right? But I slept like a baby because there's nothing I could have done, right? Um, so again, what makes me unrelaxed is me thinking that there is something that I could have done better that I haven't. But as long as these are is not an issue, I'm not very relaxed, but relaxed enough.
Yeah, I think this example with SVB is very relevant because it's really about mindset. You know, not worrying about the things you can't control is very rational, but most people don't do it. Most people worry about these things. And so it's really about the mindset. It's like an internal switch, and it's very important to have that if you can, because this is a marathon. It's not a sprint. It's a 10-year, 20-year journey of very tough times. So it needs to have that mindset set up right, so to speak. Second question is, what book do you like to recommend to others?
So what? Yeah, there's a lot of interesting books that I've read, and I've always actually I like the books that are not very theoretical about the way of doing business. Rather, are usually stories of actual businesses that have actually succeeded, and looking through how they've taken decisions. And I think Delivering Happiness, which is the story of Zappos. That's a
Yep.
company that used to sell shoes that got acquired by Amazon. Was one of the best books that I've ever read, because these guys went to one of the and competed with one of these behemoths, and they were very, very, very focused on what they do till they actually made it, and then eventually got acquired, right? So this is one of the books that I can recall that I really, really actually learned a lot from.
Yeah, great example. So, who do you think we should have as a guest on the podcast?
Um, so I haven't looked through who have all the people that you've actually had, but I definitely would recommend Mudassir of Careem. He's one of the most resilient people that I've ever seen in my life. And he's actually was able to make a very big dent in a lot of people's life. Some of them realized it, some of them did not realize it. But not just in a lot of people's life, but he have actually paved the way for companies like us. He brought a lot of new investors to the region, and made people believe that you can build something out of the Middle East. And that's what we're trying to do as MaxAB as well. And we hope to pave the way for the next generation of startups to even do a better job than what we have done.
Yeah, I'm a very inspiring person. And Careem, has the Careem Mafia, and so many great startups have come out of it. You are one of members of this mafia, so happy to have you today. What question should I have asked you that I didn't?
Well, you asked me a lot of a lot of corner ones, so pretty much you have them covered. There's nothing that that comes to mind now, to be honest. But happy to take any further ones that you might have for me.
Okay, maybe in the second episode of our interview sometime in the future.
So,
So, I'm going to be wrapping up, and I like to close the podcast on a note of gratitude. So, what is a gift someone has given you that has had a large positive effect on your life?
it's my wife accepting to marry me is the biggest blessing that I've had so far.
Wonderful note to end on. How long ago did you marry?
A year and a half now, and she's keeping
Wonderful.
up with me not being around as much as I would like to. So I'm very grateful to have her in my life.
Yeah. This is, I mean, I just had another podcast like the one before. Actually, the episode just came out yesterday, and he also spoke about that. And I also second this, having a spouse who is really supportive makes such a huge difference in our stressful type of startup lives. So it's a
It
wonderful
does.
note to end on. And thank you very much for taking all these wayward questions and having all these great answers. And looking forward to maybe meeting you physically since there's no more COVID sometime.
Hopefully one day, man. And thank you so much, Ali, for having me. I hope this was helpful.
That was wonderful. Thank you, Bilal.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Ali.